Hi guys, welcome back to another tutorial. So today I'll be sharing with you guys how I made this lovely dress. So if it's something you're interested in, please keep on watching and let's get started. So for this design, we're going to be drafting on our pattern paper first, and the first line I marked on the pattern paper is about 1 inch, and this is just a guideline for my shoulder slope. So you can measure about 1 inch or half an inch for that. So the next line is my shoulder to my bust point. As you can see where my tape roll started from, I measured 10 inches for my bust point. So that's the second line. Then the last line is my shoulder to my waistline. So my shoulder to my waistline is actually 16 inches. Let me just label it. That's my bust point, and this my waistline. So my shoulder to waist is 16 inches, but I added half an inch to it, making it 16.5. So the half an inch will be for my sewing allowance. So next I'll be taking my shoulder measurement, and my shoulder divided by 2 is 8. So that means my shoulder is 16 inches. 16 divided by 2 will give me 8 inches. So I marked it on that first line that I marked. Then I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. So now I'll be using 3 inches as my neck width. So you can use between 3 to 4 inches depending on how wide you want the neck to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect that 1 inch I came down by for my shoulder slope. I'm just going to connect it to the neck width. So now I'll be taking my armhole measurement, and I'm sure you guys should know how to take your armhole measurement. If you don't know how to do it, just divide your bust circumference by 6 and add 1.5 inches to it. So my armhole circumference is actually 8 inches. So right now I'll just go ahead and draw a straight line from my shoulder slope down to that 8 inches I marked. And remember, I marked from the shoulder slope I came down by, not from the first line. So now I just drew another line. So now I'm going to go ahead and divide that 8 inches into 2. So it will give me 4 inches. So I'll mark that 4 inches and I'll go in by about half an inch. So this is for my armhole curve. So now I'll just go ahead and connect that half inch I came in by. I'll just go ahead and connect it straight to the shoulder slope like so. So at this point, I'll just go ahead and use my curved ruler to make a curve to that half an inch I came in by. So this will serve as my armhole curve. So now I'll be taking my neck depth and I'll be using 3 inches for that. So if you want to go lower, you can use 4 inches. The pattern on this dress, that's a picture on my thumbnail, is actually like a turtleneck, but I decided not to use a turtleneck for this. So my client just wanted a normal neck. So now I'll just go ahead and connect my neck width to my neck depth. That's the 3 inches I came down by. And I will use my curved ruler to make a curve. So next I'll be taking my dart measurement, and I'll be using my nipple to nipple measurement to do that. So my nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 will give me 4. So I'll mark that 4 on my bust line and on my waist line. So I'm just going to connect both together like so. So on that bust point line, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. Then on my waistline, I'll go in by half an inch on both sides of that nipple to nipple line that I marked. So this will serve as my dart line. So I'll go ahead and connect the 1 inch I came down by from my bust point. I'm just going to connect it to the half an inch I came in and I came out. So this is our dart measurement. So now I'm going to be taking my bust circumference. So my bust divided by 4 is about 9.25. I'm going to mark it on that armhole line. And I'm going to add about 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So next I'll be taking my waist measurement, and my waist divided by 4 is about 7.75. So I'll go ahead and mark it, and I'll add this 1 inch of the dart. So remember, we took off an inch on both sides, which will make it 1 inch. This is to avoid any shortage after holding the dart. Then I'll add 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So now I'll just go ahead and use my ruler to connect the measurement I took on my bust and on my waistline. So this is the upper part of this dress. So before cutting out, I'll go ahead and add about half an inch on my shoulder slope for joining. So please don't forget to add the half an inch allowance so it doesn't come out short. So now I'll just go ahead and use my ruler to connect, and I'll also connect it to my neck width and also to the armhole. So now we are done drafting the front pattern of the upper part of the dress, and I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So now for the back, as you can see, I'm going to be using another pattern paper, and I'm going to be adding 1.5 inches for my zipper allowance. That's for the back. So I place the front on the back pattern, and I'm measuring 1.5 inches for my zipper allowance. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out after measuring my zipper allowance. And please, the armhole for the back is different from the front. So you can see how I'm measuring it. The armhole for the back is a little bit outwards than the one for the front. So this is going to be our armhole for the back. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So you can see that when I was cutting, I didn't cut out the neck. This is because I'm not going to use the same 3 inches I used for the neck depth at the front for the back. I'll rather use 1.5 inches for the neck depth at the back. But if you want to use 3 inches, you can go ahead and use it. So now I'll just go ahead and remove the front pattern from the back so I can make my curve for the neckline at the back. So now I'll go ahead and connect that 1.5 inches I came down by. I'll just connect it to my zipper line like so. So I'll just connect like so as well. So right now I'll just go ahead and make a curve for my neckline. So right now I'll just go ahead and cut the neck out. So now this is my front and back pattern. So right now, for the back pattern, I want to eliminate any zip bulge that we might have after sewing the dress. So what I'll do is that from that 1.5 inches that I added for my zipper allowance, I'm going to take about half an inch or maybe 0.75. I'll come in by 0.25 or half an inch. Then I'll go ahead and use my ruler to connect like so. Just watch how I'm doing it. I'm going to connect from the tip of that 1.5 inches I added for the zipper allowance down to the 0.75 I came in by. So now from that 0.75 I came in by, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches outward. So this is going to be my new zipper allowance. So I'm just going to mark it all the way as you can see, and I'll use my ruler to connect. So this here is going to serve as my new zipper allowance. So I'm just going to go ahead and label it. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So it's time to draft the skirt part of this dress, and I'm drafting on a pattern paper as well. I'll advise you to fold your pattern paper into 2 when you're drafting because of the pattern of this dress. As you can see, I already marked my waistline, which is about 1 inch, and from my waistline I marked 9 inches for my hip line. So you can use between 8 to 9 inches, but for me I use 9 inches. So from that hip line I marked about 6 inches, and this will serve as the length of the dress. This is because it's going to have a flay at the down part. So I just marked 6 inches. So depending on how long you want yours to be, you can make it about 7, 8 or 9 inches. But for me, I'm using 6 inches because of how I want the flayed part to be. So on my waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4 and to give me 7.75, and I'll add about 1.5 inches to it for my sewing allowance. So on my hip line as well, I'm going to divide my hip by 4 and it gives me about 10.5, and I'll add 1.5 inches to it for the sewing allowance. So now for the next line, that's the line I want the gathered part to be. I'm going to measure whatever it is I have on my hip line, including my sewing allowance. Then I'll mark it on top of that line. So right now I'm going to remove 1.5 inches from it. That's from the 12.5. I remove 1.5 inches. Then I'm going to go ahead and connect my hip line to that 1.5 inches I removed. You can see the way I did it. Then I'll use my hip curve to connect my waist to my hip line. So you can see what I have here. So I'm not going to be using a dart for this dress. So what I'll do now is come down by 1 inch from my waistline and I'll use my curved ruler to connect. So just watch what I'm doing. I came down by 1 inch and I'm using my curved ruler to connect. This also works perfectly and the dress will also come out very fitted. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So for the back, I'll be placing my front pattern on a fresh pattern paper, and as you can see, I already took my zipper allowance, which is about 1.5 inches, just the same way I did it at the front. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out exactly as it is right now. You can as well pin the front pattern on the back pattern to make it easier for you. So right now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So please don't forget to add your zipper allowance before you cut. So now I transferred my skirt pattern, that's the front pattern, to another pattern paper and I folded it into two. So that's why I said when you're drafting you should fold your pattern paper into two. I'm going to be using this brown paper for another pattern entirely. That's why I transferred it to a white paper. So it's this white one we are going to be using for the pattern of the skirt. So now I'm going to open up this pattern and I'll be drafting the curved part of this skirt as you can see in the picture. So right now from my hip line, I'm going to go ahead and just trace it out. Just watch what I'm doing. So you can see I'm making a curve all the way. So you can either use your curved ruler or you can just use your free hand to do it. So I'm just going to use my curved ruler to finish the trace that I made. So you can see what it looks like. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So I'm going to be doing the same thing at the back as well, and as you can see I cut out the back on a fresh pattern paper and I'm going to be tracing it out the same way I did it at the front. So just watch what I'm doing. I'm just going to trace it out like so. So right now I'll just go ahead and use my ruler to connect. So just watch what I'm doing. So at this point, before cutting, I'm just going to fold this piece into two because this will be my zipper allowance. Then before cutting the curved part of it, so you can see what it looks like. So now I'll just go ahead and label it so I don't get confused when I'm cutting on my fabric. So you can see what I'm doing. So right now I'm going to be cutting on my fabric, and make sure you check the places that are stretchy on the fabric before you cut. So you can see that this side of my fabric is more stretchy than the other side. So make sure you check the part that is stretchy before cutting. So right now I'm going to go ahead and fold my fabric into two like so. Then I'm going to place my pattern paper on it. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it out. You can as well pin your pattern paper on your fabric if it's going to be difficult for you while cutting. But for me, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out like so. So I'm cutting out the front pattern first before I cut out the back. So this is it, and I'm just going to put it aside. So I've also gone ahead to cut out my back pattern as well. So now I'll be cutting out the colored part of the lower part of this dress, as you can see in this picture. So now I'm just going to go ahead and place it on my fabric, and I'll make sure I pin it down. So now after pinning it down, I'm going to be adding half an inch to this part of the dress. This is because I'm going to be joining it to the black fabrics as it is in the picture. So to avoid any shortage, I'm just going to add half an inch all the way like so, and I'll connect. That's before cutting it out. I'll also add half an inch to the upper part of the skirt like so. So now I'll just go ahead and connect it. I'll connect this down part as well, then I'll cut it out. So now I'll be doing the same thing I did for the upper part of the front to the upper part of the back. So you can see the way I labeled it, that's B1 and B2. So now I'll just go ahead and pin it down like so. Then I'll add half an inch to the upper and to the lower part of it. That will be for my allowances. So now I'll just go ahead and cut it up. Please, at this point, if you've not subscribed to my channel, please don't forget to do so. So I'm going to be using this black fabric for the down part of the dress, and you can see how stretchy it is. So I'm checking the stretchy part so I can use it for the horizontal part of the dress. So now I'm going to go ahead and place my pattern paper on it the same way I did it at the front. Then I'll go ahead and pin it down. So after pinning, I'm going to add half an inch to this part as well. So I'll go ahead and use my chalk to connect it, then I'll cut it out. So this is what it's going to look like after attaching these two together. Now for the back, I already pinned it down on my fabric, and I'll add half an inch as well to join the upper part. Then I'll just go ahead and use my chalk to connect, and I'll cut it out. So this is exactly how yours should look if you followed what I did. This is how yours should look. So now that we are done cutting, it is time to join the fabrics. But before joining, I'm going to be cutting out a facing for the upper part of this dress. So now I'm placing the front pattern on a separate material, and I'll go ahead and cut it out. So just watch what I'm doing. So I'm going to be doing the same thing for the back as well. So I went ahead to overlock it before I attach it to my main fabric, as you can see. So I'm done sewing the facing to the main fabric, and I also ironed it. You can see how neat it looks. I also added a little bit of hemming gum so that it can lay flatly, and I also did the same thing for the back as well. So right now I'll be taking my dart on my fabric as a front piece, and I came down by half an inch from my shoulder to my bust point. So my shoulder to bust point is actually 10 inches, but I'll come down by 1 inch to make it 11. So now I'm doing 11 inches for my shoulder to my bust point. So on that 11 inches I came down by, I'll divide my nipple to nipple measurement by 2 and it will give me 4 inches. So I'll mark that 4 inches on my bust point and also on my waistline. So I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler to connect. So once I'm done doing that, I'll take half an inch on both sides of that line, which will be my dart. So I'm taking out half an inch inwards and outward. Then I'll connect that half an inch to the 11 inches that I marked. So you can see what I'm doing. So I'll flip it to the other side and do the exact same thing. So for the back, I'm going to place both pieces on top of each other. That's the right side facing the right side. And I'll go ahead and pin it down so that it can align with each other. So after pinning it down, I'm going to go ahead and measure 1.5 inches like so. That's for the zipper allowance. I'm just going to measure the 1.5 inches all the way and I'll use my ruler to connect. So I'm going to be doing the same thing I did at the front. I'm just going to come down by half of an inch. Then I'll measure my shoulder to my bust point. My actual shoulder to bust point is 10 inches, but I'll come down by 1 inch to make it 11 inches. Then I'll also measure my nipple to nipple measurement, which is 4. So I'll measure it on that 11 inches and on my waistline. Then I'll also connect just exactly what I did at the front. That's what I'm doing now. But remember, I started from the 1.5 inches of my zipper allowance. I didn't start from the edge of the material. So now I'm going to take half an inch on both sides as well, and I will connect it to the 11 inches I came down by. So I'm going to be doing the exact same thing at the other side. Right now I'm just using my hands to mark it, and I'm going to do the exact thing I did at the other side. I'm going to be doing it at the side as well. So now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'll run a stitch on it. That's the dart. I'm going to do that on the front and the back piece, and I'm done doing that and you can see what it looks like. I also did the same thing at the back, but for the back I joined my zipper allowance together first before joining the dart, so you can see how the front and back piece looks. So now for this part of the dress, I'm going to be pinning it down like so. So after pinning it down, I'm just going to go ahead and sew about half of an inch. So this is what it looks like after pinning. I've not even sewn it yet, but you can see how it's already looking. So right now I'm going to take it to my machine and I'll sew it down. So this is what it looks like after sewing it. I'm just going to trim out these excesses. I'll just trim it out. So for the back, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did at the front. I'm going to pin it down, then I'll take it to my machine and sew it with half of an inch. So I'm done sewing and you can see the outcome. I also went ahead to overlock it and you can see how everything aligned. You can see what it looks like. So right now I'll just go ahead and join this back piece together. I'll make sure it aligns with each other. So now I'm going to be marking the 1.5 inches for my zipper allowance the same way I did at the upper part. I'm going to be marking it, then I'll go ahead and sew it together. You can see it. I'll just go to my machine and I'll attach it together. So after sewing together, you can see what it looks like. You can see the black part aligns properly on both sides. So now I'm going to use half of an inch to join the upper part to the lower part. I just opened it up a little bit, so I'm going to use half of an inch to join both parts together. And remember, this is the back part of the dress. So I went ahead to join the upper part and lower part of the front part as well, and you can see what it looks like. So now for the back, I'm going to attach the zipper to it. And the first thing I'll do is to open it up before attaching the zip. So I'm done attaching the zip, and you can see what it looks like. You can see how everything aligns. So now I'll be joining the shoulder of the front and back piece together. So I'm just going to place them on top of each other, and I will use 1/2 inch to attach. So after doing that, I'm going to go ahead and join the back and front piece together using my body measurement. So now I'll just pin it. First of all, I'm going to pin it down. So I'm done pinning it, then I'll use my body measurements to attach it together. So I'm done attaching, and you can see how neat it looks. So now it's time to sew the gathered part of this dress. I remember it's a 2-step gathered, so I'm going to be using this as the lower part of it, and I measured 5.5 inches for the depth of it. You can see I measured 5.5 inches. Then for the length, I'm going to be measuring up depending on how full you want it to be. For me, I want it to be very full at the lower part, so I'm going to measure about 60 inches. So you can see I measured about 60 inches of fabric times 2. So I measured 2 of it. That's 120 inches altogether. So you can see that's for the lower part of the gathered. So I'm just going to attach these 2 pieces together. Then I'm going to be doing the same thing for the longer part of it, and this is about 7.5 inches. That's for the longer part of the gathered dress. So I'm going to be attaching it together. It's also 120 inches altogether. So I ran a gathered stitch on each of them after attaching both pieces together. So I ran a gathered stitch on it, and I'm just going to drag it carefully so that the thread doesn't cut. If it cuts, it's going to be difficult for me to gather it. So I'm just going to carefully drag the thread. And before gathering the fabric, I actually sewed the down part of it to make it neat. I sewed the down part of it before gathering it. So this is what both of them look like. That's the upper and lower part of it. So you can see how they overlap on each other. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to attach it to the dress. So I used my pin to pin it down on the fabric before joining, and I'm going to explain how I did that. So at the back of the dress, I opened the back a little bit, then I placed the shorter part of the gathers first on the dress so you can see what it looks like. So if you notice that your gathered is not enough, your gathers is not enough, just make sure you drag it a little bit until it aligns on both edges so you can see what it looks like. So now I'll be placing the longer part of the gathers on it as well. So I'm going to place it on the edge. You can see how it looks on the outside. So I'm going to make sure I place it on the edge of the back. That's part of the zipper, the side of the zip. I'm going to place it on it, and I will use my pin to pin it down as well. So please, if you don't understand any part of this video, you can always pause it and replay it. And also, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask in the comment section. I'll be glad to answer all your questions. So I'll pin it down all the way around. You can see what I'm doing. So after pinning it down, I'm just going to go to my sewing machine and I'll attach it together so you can see what it looks like on the outside. So this is what it looks like after sewing it. I also went ahead to close that part that I opened at the down part. So you can see how neat and beautiful it looks, and you can see how puffy the gathers look. So you can see what it looks like. So all it needs right now is just proper ironing, and you can attach any type of sleeve you want to attach to it. I didn't make a video of the sleeve I attached to the dress, but you can choose whatever sleeve you want to attach to it. So we've come to the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, and if you're a first timer on my channel, please don't forget to subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.